Hey guys, welcome back to more Just Know HOA stories. In this video, a homeowner association built an illegal clubhouse on my vacant piece of property to expand their land. Here is what happened. Let's dive right into the story. First, some background. I inherited a decent-sized piece of land, about 2.5 acres, from my great-uncle Rob when he passed away 3 years ago. It's a beautiful piece of property that sits right next to one of those fancy gated communities. You know, the kind with perfectly manicured lawns and strict rules about what color you can paint your mailbox. The land itself is mostly undeveloped except for a small storage shed where I keep my landscaping equipment and a weather station I installed. I'm kind of a weather nerd. Great Uncle Rob was like a second father to me. He bought this land back in the 80s when the area was mostly just farmland, planning to build his dream house there. Well, unfortunately, he never got around to it before he passed. When I inherited it, I decided to keep it both as an investment and because, well, it meant something to me. I've always made sure to maintain it properly, keeping the grass cut, removing any fallen branches after storms, that sort of thing. I even installed clear private property and no trespassing signs along the perimeter, especially where it borders the gated community. Now, about that gated community, Redacted Estates, not the real name, their HOA has quite a reputation in our area. They have been featured in local news several times and not for good reasons. Last year they tried to fine an elderly resident $500 per day because her roses were the wrong shade of red according to their guidelines. The year before that, they attempted to force a military family to remove a small flag from their porch while the husband was deployed overseas. Real piece of work, this HOA. The current situation started on a Tuesday morning in April. I was working from home when I got a call from my neighbor Tom, who lives across the street from my property. "Hey, there's some guy walking around your land with surveying equipment," he said. "Thought you might want to know." I immediately drove over to check it out, and sure enough, there was a surveyor placing stakes in my property complete with little orange flags. When I approached him, he barely glanced up from his equipment. "Excuse me," I said, "what exactly are you doing on my property?" He looked at me like I was some kind of nuisance. "This is part of the Redacted Estates expansion project. I'm marking the boundaries for the new clubhouse." I blinked a few times, trying to process what he had just said. "I think there's been a mistake. This is private property, I own this land, and I'm not part of Redacted Estates." The surveyor finally stopped what he was doing and pulled out a folder. "That's not what my paperwork shows. According to this, the HOA has approved construction for a new clubhouse on this parcel." "I don't care what your paperwork shows," I replied, starting to get annoyed. "I have the deed to this property. The HOA has no authority here." He shrugged, clearly not interested in getting involved in a property dispute. "Look, I just go where they tell me. You will need to take it up with the HOA office." I took photos of all the survey stakes and flags before heading straight to the HOA office. The receptionist tried to tell me that I needed an appointment, but I insisted on speaking with someone immediately. After about 20 minutes of general waiting, I was finally shown into the office of Gerald Watson, and by the way, once again, ripe stars, I anonymized all the names to not reflect any real people. The HOA president. Picture every stereotype of an HOA president you've ever heard of, and that is Gerald. Perfectly pressed golf shirt, khakis with a crease sharp enough to cut paper, and an expression that suggested he was perpetually smelling something unpleasant. "Mr. Watson," I started, pulling out my property deed and tax records. "I'm here because your surveyor is currently marking boundaries on my private property for some kind of clubhouse construction." He barely glanced at the documents I had placed on his desk. "Oh yeah, the new wellness center. It's going to be a wonderful addition to our community fitness room, spa facilities, and maybe even a small indoor pool." "You're not understanding me," I said firmly. "This is my land. I'm not part of your HOA. You cannot build anything there." Gerald leaned back in his chair with a condescending smile. "Listen, young man, this area has been earmarked for community development for quite some time. I'm sure there's just been some minor clerical error in the paperwork." "There's no clerical error. I inherited this land from my great uncle. I have all the documentation right here." He waved his hand dismissively. "We are improving the entire area. Property values will rise. You should be thanking us, really. Now, if you will excuse me, I will have a meeting about unapproved bird feeders to attend to." I stood my ground. "I'm not leaving until you agree to stop this construction project." "Security will escort you out if necessary," he replied, reaching for his iPhone. "And please, don't make this difficult. The community's lawyers are very good at what they do." I left before security arrived, but not because I was intimidated. I needed to start documenting everything and planning my next move. On my way out, I overheard 2 staff members discussing how the HOA had been trying to acquire my land for years, but my great uncle had always refused to sell. Over the next few days, I sent certified letters to the HOA demanding they cease and desist any construction plans, but they were ignored. I installed security cameras around my property, pointing them at the areas where the survey stakes had been placed. I also hired a professional photographer to document the current state of the land, just in case. Then, exactly 1 week after the surveyor incident, the construction crews showed up and I was ready. I immediately called the police to report the trespassing, but the HOA had apparently prepared for this. They showed the responding officers that some kind of paperwork claiming they had proper authorization for the construction. The officers, not wanting to get involved in what they saw as a civil matter, basically told me to just take it to court. The construction moved at an incredible pace. It was like watching an ant colony on steroids. They clearly wanted to get as much done as possible before any legal action could stop them. Within days, they had cleared a large section of my land and poured the foundation. That's when I contacted Sarah, a property rights attorney, who had successfully handled several cases against aggressive HOAs in our state. During our first meeting, she listened to my story, reviewed my documentation, and actually smiled. "They've made a serious mistake," she said, reviewing the photos I had taken. "This is about as clear-cut as it gets. They're literally building on land they don't own, with documented evidence that they knew it was not theirs. The damages here could be substantial." So, we filed a lawsuit against the HOA for trespassing, property damage, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. We also requested punitive damages, citing the HOA's pattern of aggressive and unauthorized behavior. Sarah added something called quiet title action to prevent any future claims on my property, and the local news picked up the story "Gated Community Builds Clubhouse on Private Land, David vs. Goliath Battle Heads to Court" was the headline. The comment section of the online article was filled with people sharing their own horror HOA stories. The HOA's response to the lawsuit, though, was interesting. They tried to claim that my land had been effectively abandoned despite my regular maintenance, and that they had adverse possession rights, which was not even close to being true, and even attempted to argue that their construction actually increased my property's value, so I should be grateful for it. The day we went to court, I was nervous but prepared. Sarah had coached me well on what to expect. The HOA's lawyer was aggressive, trying to paint me as some absentee landowner who was standing in the way of community progress. But we had everything documented: my regular maintenance of the property, the clear property markers and signs, the ignored cease and desist letters, and most damaging of all, evidence that the HOA had previously tried and failed to purchase the land from my great uncle. The judge, an older woman, did not bother hiding her irritation with the HOA's arguments. When their lawyer tried to suggest that they had assumed the land was part of their development plan, she interrupted and said, "Counselor, are you seriously arguing that your client, a homeowners association, did not bother to verify property ownership before even beginning construction? That they ignored clear property markers, no trespassing signs, and certified letters from the actual owner? Please tell me you have a better defense than 'we assumed it was ours.'" But they didn't. The judge's ruling was comprehensive and, frankly, beautiful to hear. She ordered the HOA to immediately cease all construction activities, remove all construction materials and equipment within 48 hours, demolish any structures they had built at their own expense, and restore the land to its original condition, including replacing any trees they had removed. And also to pay me $175,000 in compensatory damages and pay an additional $250,000 in punitive damages, and also cover all my legal fees. She furthermore issued a permanent injunction preventing the HOA from making any future claims on my property. The best part, though, during her ruling, the judge specifically addressed Gerald Watson. "Mr. Watson, your organization's behavior in this matter has been nothing short of egregious. You attempted to seize private property through force and intimidation, ignored clear evidence of ownership, and proceeded with construction despite explicit warnings. This court finds your actions not only illegal but demonstrative of a disturbing pattern of abuse of power. You might want to consider whether your position as HOA president continues to serve the best interests of your community." The aftermath was spectacular. Within a week, construction crews were back and this time demolishing the half-built clubhouse. The HOA had to take out a special assessment to cover the damages, which meant every homeowner in redacted estates had to pay an additional $2,000. As you can imagine, this did not make Gerald very popular with his neighbors. Gerald then resigned as HOA president 2 weeks later, citing personal reasons. I heard through Tom that there was a very heated HOA meeting where residents demanded his resignation. Apparently, someone had made t-shirts with "Gerald Watson, Property Pirate" printed on them. As for me, I used part of the settlement money to build something on my property, a beautiful community playground. I worked with a local nonprofit to set it up, and now families from the surrounding area, including some redacted estates residents, can let their kids play there and enjoy the space. The rest of the money went into a fund for maintaining the property and supporting local land conservation efforts. Great Uncle Rob would have liked that. Oh, and remember those security cameras I installed? I never took them down. Better safe than sorry, right? The whole experience taught me something important. Sometimes you have to stand your ground even when facing what seems like an insurmountable opponent. The HOA thought they could bully me into submission because that's what had worked for them in the past, but with proper documentation, a good lawyer, and the law on your side, even the most entitled HOA can be brought to justice. I still get people stopping by the playground to talk about the case. Most of them have their own HOA stories to share, though none quite as dramatic as mine. It's become something of a local legend, and I've even heard that some nearby HOAs have become notably more careful about property rights since the ruling. As for Gerald though, well, last I heard he moved to a non-HOA neighborhood. Ironic, isn't it? Update: since many people have been asking for more details about the actual court proceedings and settlement numbers, I thought I would clarify a few things. The $175,000 in compensatory damages was calculated based on boring numbers, I won't really read them, and the $250K in punitive damages was actually on the lower end of what we could have pushed for given the HOA's clear malicious intent. Sarah told me we could have probably gotten more if we had pushed harder, but I was satisfied with the amount. The legal fees came to around $65,000, which the HOA had to pay on top of everything else. Also, I've been told that redacted estates is having trouble selling homes now. Apparently, when potential buyers Google the community, this case comes up and it is affecting property values. Cannot say I feel too bad about that. Update number 2, a lot of you have been messaging me asking for an update on the HOA situation, and honestly, there's quite a bit to share. The past 6 months have been interesting to say the least. First off, remember how I mentioned that redacted estates was having trouble selling homes? That situation got even more intense. The HOA tried to fix their reputation by hiring a PR firm, which backfired spectacularly. The firm suggested that they should reach out to me to make amends and try to get some positive press. So one morning, I got a call from the new HOA president, Linda Mitchell. Unlike Gerald, she actually seemed reasonable. "We would like to discuss a potential partnership with your community playground," she said. "Many of our residents love what you have done with the space and we think working together could benefit everyone." I was skeptical at first, but agreed to meet with her and 2 other board members at a local coffee shop. They proposed adding a gate in the fence between our properties to give their residents easier access to the playground, offering to pay for the construction and any additional security measures I wanted. "We will also cover liability insurance for their use of the playground," Linda added, "and we would like to make an annual contribution to the playground's maintenance fund." I took a few days to think it over and discuss it with my lawyer, Sarah. She helped me draft a detailed agreement that protected my property rights while allowing for controlled access. The key points were: the gate would be locked with keycard access, all redacted residents would need to sign liability waivers, and the HOA would pay $10,000 annually for playground maintenance. They would have zero decision-making power over the playground or my property. The agreement could be terminated by me at any time, and they accepted all the terms without argument. I think they were just happy to have something positive to show potential buyers. But here is where it gets really interesting. Remember Gerald Watson, the former HOA president? Well, he didn't just move away quietly. About 2 months ago, I got served with papers. He was suing me personally for defamation and intentional interference with business relationships. Apparently, he blamed me for ruining his real estate business, he is a realtor, because nobody wanted to work with the HOA president who tried to steal someone's land. Sarah actually laughed when I showed her the lawsuit. This is what we call a SLAP suit, strategic lawsuit against public participation. It's basically legal intimidation. "Don't worry, we got this." She filed a motion to dismiss under our state's anti-SLAPP laws, arguing that everything I had said about the case was either true or protected speech about a matter of public record. She also requested that Gerald pay our legal fees for having to defend against a frivolous lawsuit. The hearing was last week. Gerald's lawyer tried to argue that my comments to the local news and my previous post, which had gone viral, had maliciously misrepresented his client's actions. The judge was not having it. His response was perfect. "Mr. Watson, let me make sure I understand your position. You are suing because the defendant accurately described your attempts to build on his land without permission, which led to a court ruling against you. And you're claiming defamation because he shared public court records and his personal experience, which you don't deny is true?" Gerald's lawyer tried to argue that the widespread sharing of the story constituted harassment, but the judge just cut him off. "Counselor, the fact that your client's actions went viral and affected his business is not the defendant's problem. Perhaps Mr. Watson should have considered the potential consequences before attempting to seize private property." Motion to dismiss granted. Additionally, I'm ordering your client to pay the defendant's legal fees for this frivolous action. Well, those legal fees came to $12,500, which Gerald had to pay. Sarah tells me he's appealing the decision, but she does not think it will go anywhere. One elderly resident from Redacted pulled me aside and said, "You know, we all thought Gerald was looking out for our interests. But this playground has brought more value to our community than another clubhouse ever could have." The property value situation in Redacted has actually started to turn around, but not because of their PR firm. The playground has become a selling point. I've seen their real estate listings now advertising access to award-winning community playground as a feature. There's one more interesting development. A reporter who covered the original story reached out to me recently. Apparently, she's writing a book about how HOA overreach across the country, and she wants to include my case as a chapter. She's interviewed several other Redacted residents who have come forward with their own stories about Gerald's tenure as president. Some of the stories are pretty shocking. I thought my situation was bad, but it seems like it was just the tip of the iceberg. The new HOA board under Linda's leadership has actually been working to reform their policies. They have reduced fines, simplified their approval processes, and started requiring board members to take classes on property law and homeowner rights. They are being held up as an example of how HOAs can change for the better, which is pretty ironic considering where this all started. As for me, I've become somewhat of an unofficial consultant for people dealing with HOA disputes. I don't charge anything, I just share my experience and connect people with resources like Sarah. It really feels good to help others stand up for their rights. Great Uncle Rob's land has become exactly what he always wanted it to be, a place that brings the community together, not in the way the HOA originally planned, but in a much more meaningful way. Gerald's appeal was just denied last week, and he's been ordered to pay additional legal fees for filing a frivolous appeal. Sarah says this should be the end of it. He has run out of legal options. And those Gerald Watson property pirate shirts, well, they've become collector items. Someone offered me $100 for mine last week. I turned them down. Some things are priceless. The most satisfying part though, every morning when I visit the playground, I can see the spot where their Clubhouse foundation used to be. Sometimes the best revenge is not about getting even, it's about creating something beautiful in place of what others tried to take from you. To end things, we will read a fantastic new petty revenge story that you don't want to miss. It is titled, "When Male Bravado Costs You Thousands." Sometimes the best answer is no answer, and silence is loud to provocateurs. I went for a food tasting recently at an Indian restaurant for an event me and my 3 older male colleagues/friends are planning. The owner of the restaurant assumed immediately that one of my guy friends was the one with the money and the one in charge. I'm a rather subdued person when you first meet me, so I don't blame him for that mix-up. Upon the food tasting, he was doing a good sales pitch and tried to drop some humor in there. We started talking about catering, and he turns to my male friend and asks if I can cook because I don't look like it from how skinny I am. Obviously assuming I am someone's wife and not speaking to me directly, as if I was not on equal parts. I simply stared at him blankly, intensely enough for him to feel uncomfortable. Even replying to such a stupid comment is beyond me. It was not a scowl, but it was enough of an unreadable expression so that he could tell that I did not approve of it. Immediately he retracted and said, "I'm sorry, I'm being an awkward uncle." That was not enough to make me say no to the venue, however. We started talking about corkage fees and supplying drinks and so forth, and as I'm the younger one of the lot, he turns to one of the men and says, you will need a limit on shots because you know the younger ones, gestures to me, can go a bit crazy. My friend told him that I don't drink as a Buddhist, and then he pressed on and said my friends probably do because you know how girls go wild. It's a professional event and I came as a professional, but at that point I felt as if I was being treated like a young BIMBO. Again, I'm the one with the deposit and final say, so I didn't feel the need to say anything apart from glaring at him. After the tasting, he was very sure that it was a done deal, so before even getting a yes from us, he turns up at the table with the cost spreadsheet and the card reader. I was still contemplating whether to book this place, and of course the manager is an ass, but the price is good and I care more for getting the job done. As a joke, as if this was the funniest thing ever, he passes me the card machine and says, £500 deposit, as if the idea that I was gonna pay the most outlandish thing says, don't worry, look at her face, just kidding. Again, I simply stared and the rest of the men around me were looking down really uncomfortably. It was a joke that bombed at the table with awkward silence. I told him we really appreciate the food, but the venue is not really what we are looking for. It was the first time we had addressed each other properly all evening, and he looked very confused to hear it from me. Again, he turned to my male friend to double check what I said, and my friend said, well, it's her event. And the manager's face dropped. The truth was, I was not really happy with minimum capacity of the event, and I did not like the fact that they were also renting out upstairs for a separate event. So basically, I had valid reasons to decline, but his lack of social awareness really tipped my decision over the edge. His attitude lost him around $9,000 in business, and I hope it stinks. It was so satisfying seeing his awkward expression when he realized I was the decision maker. And yeah guys, please don't forget to subscribe to the channel, and I will see you again tomorrow.